Hello, everyone, and welcome to the key panel event helping us to start the Indeed 2023 forum. I'm very glad to be joined today by Fenicia Baltut, by Jeren Niaz-Berdieva, and by Lynn Davies. We are going to be looking at the issue and the topic of why evidence-based evaluation, evidence-based policy, and evidence-based practice matter in PVE, CVE, de-radicalization, and crime prevention. We're very glad to be joined today by three exceptional leaders and experts in the field. And to get us started off, I'm going to invite, please, Fenicia, to start us with the opening comments for the key panel.
Thank you very much, Kay. It's a pleasure to be here. So good afternoon, everyone. And on the behalf of the EU CT coordinator, I really would like to thank the organizers of this Indeed International Policy and Practitioners Forum for giving us the opportunity to speak today. I don't know if you are aware of it, but the EU CT coordinator always emphasizes the central role of the prevention of radicalization in the EU counterterrorism policy, and also the importance of information exchange between city policymakers and practitioners. So we consider that the evaluation of EU PCV policies, both at EU and national level, is a key priority for the EU. We also promote the evaluation of the instruments we implement to ensure that they are fully in line with the reality on the ground and the need expressed by practitioners. So that's one of the reasons that we attach great value to the Indeed project. Precisely because it's aimed to enhance our efforts to tackle radicalization through information exchange between stakeholders, using its network of smart hubs, which bring together frontline practitioners, policymakers, research institutions, and experts in the field of PCVE and crime prevention. As you know, also, the terrorist threat in the EU remains high, especially after the recent terrorist attacks that occurred in France and Belgium 1 month ago. In this context, and also in the current conflict in Gaza, we really see the importance to pay attention to the prevention of radicalization with the spread of on internet of terrorist and violent extremist content, hate speech, disinformation, as well as we call them, borderline content that can lead to radicalization. And we saw all recent terrorist attacks in Europe have been committed by lone actors or small groups of terrorists acting now at their own initiatives. And these terrorists were inspired by extremist ideologies such as Islamist extremism, but did not act as a part of the formal command and control structure of terrorist organization like it was in the past, like Daesh and Al-Qaeda. So that is why now terrorist attacks are even more difficult, I would say, to detect and prevent. As we used to say, the risk does not exist, but the better equipped we are to prevent radicalization at an early stage, the more we can minimize the exposure of certain individuals to these ideologies. However, we know also that we cannot forbid people from harboring violent thoughts if they do not act on them or incite others to do so. Even if many acts motivated by violence extremism are illegal, for example, terrorist financing, incitement to violence, or terrorist propaganda. Because violent extremism is in itself not clearly illegal. So the tools we use to counter it differ from those we are used to have to combat terrorism as such. We pursue softer policies, projects, and initiatives to prevent violent extremism and to dissuade violent extremists from acting on their convictions. And indeed, the European Union supports member states in soft efforts to prevent terrorism and violent extremism. It finances soft policies and early prevention programs that successfully reduce social exclusion and particularly among vulnerable young people. In addition, I am sure many of you are already familiar with EU's radicalization awareness networks, which facilitates exchange of experience, lessons learned, and best practices among practitioners like you. And on the basis of the final report, the high-level Commission expert group on radicalization for the EU published in May 2018, the EU is now constantly promoting systematic evaluation of prevent policies to strengthen the evidence base of EU and member states' actions. The Commission also organized in 2019 a project-based collaboration on the evaluation of the radicalization measures in the field of Islamist extremism. This project aimed to exchange experiences and knowledge in order to find important common elements on how to prevent radicalization to violence, extremism, and terrorism. It led to guidelines for practitioners and policymakers who work in the field of the radicalization and also exit programs and need to evaluate those. This particularly highlights points of special attention when commissioning, implementing, or executing evaluation, or even when communicating about it. And so in September 2020, the Commission launched a study to develop methodology adapted to its activity to include relevant indicators to measure the efficiency and effectiveness of EU policy and instruments of prevention radicalization. This also made it possible to streamline EU policy on the prevention of radicalization to better match the priorities and needs of the member states. And in this respect, we are currently in the process of setting up an EU knowledge hub. I hope it will be operational in 2025, specifically dedicated on the prevention of radicalization. It will create more synergies between the various activities and initiatives that we have at EU level. It will bring together on a single platform all the existing products in the various fields relating to the prevention of radicalization in different languages to make it easier for practitioners to access. It will also facilitate the exchange of information among the various stakeholders involved and put them in contact with each other more easily. Finally, in this new, more, let's say, user-friendly framework, it will be then easier to implement evidence-based practices and evaluation to the EU Knowledge Hub. We need to identify what works, what does not work, based on tangible evidence and indicators. This is very important so that we can adapt our policy and dedicated instruments. Therefore, we really welcome this very positively the fact that indeed projects aim to evaluate prevent policy. There are already many existing synergies between Indeed and EU works, and we also welcome in this participation in EU activities such as the HAN. In these findings are always welcome to help us to improve our policy, in particular regarding evidence-based practices, and evaluation. We have already integrated them in the study the EU conducted to evaluate the HAN, which led now to the preparation and creation of the EU Knowledge Hub. However, just to explain you better, we would like to remind that it is, of course, not the role of the EU to be critical regarding any PCV policy of any EU member state. The EU is there to support them and to help them by providing useful and valuable tools. And in this sense, we appreciate also the role of the smart hubs, which engage all the actors in co-creating the indeed evidence-based evaluation model. They foster multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholders collaboration and exchange to learn lessons from the field and also best practices, and to make it possible to advance and by engaging stakeholders on evidence-based policy, practice, and evaluation in the field. This is very, very important for us. So therefore, the creation of the evidence-based evaluation model is very important also for conducting evaluation in a very practical manner in the field. This tool needs to be, in our view, constantly adapted to the evolving process of radicalization based on practitioners' feedback and policy makers' strategic guidance to ensure it will properly meet their needs. We also consider that there is no one generic tool for evidence-based evaluation, as each situation is different, but this model should serve as a very good basis for practitioners in different domains. It could be prison, education, social work, local level, for example. And therefore, we need to be more creative and innovative while reflecting on each specific situation to improve our response. We consider also that building a common culture of evidence-based evaluation is clearly a crucial step. So we very welcome and promote the Indeed project to implement evidence-based evaluation in order to support organization in improving learning and evaluation of specific intervention in the field of prevention of radicalization. Now, I really would like to compliment the Indeed project for its contribution to the evaluation of the impact and also success of counter-radicalization policies and initiatives. We know perfectly well that this is not an easy task, as it is often impossible to precisely measure the effects of our efforts. It's not mathematics. So we know that, but it remains crucial to do so as much as possible to provide us with proper assessment of what works and what does not. And perhaps even more importantly, is the maxim: first, do not harm. That we consider that the risk associated with possible action to prevent terrorism need to be really considered. So that's why also, and I think this could be a good recommendation for the evaluation. We are not, for example, in favor of labelizing a specific project or program as CT or even de-radicalization. We prefer for sure the name of prevention of the expression of prevention of radicalization, but we also see that this kind of they could be of a possible bad reactions if we see the name of this such projects or program. So that's why, particularly when we work on preventive radicalization among young people, for example, we prefer to focus more on soft policies by incorporating a radicalization prevention component. We have also published a paper on this subject with recommendation, and I'm sure that could be useful for your work in the future. And for your good information, we expect to publish another paper on radicalization in prison before the end of the year. So that's it. Thank you very much. And I wish you all interesting forum and fruitful exchanges, and also, of course, great success in your work. Thank you.
Fenicia, thank you so much for your comments and your rich first intervention in this panel. In one of your comments, when you mentioned not labeling initiatives necessarily as about PVE, CVE, you reminded me of findings from one of the largest ever evaluations and studies that was done looking at formal and non-formal education for countering and preventing violent extremism, radicalization, and hate. And one of the questions that came up was reflecting on how so much of the work done in this field was impacted by September 11th, 2001, and this strong drive to securitist, militarist-based approaches to trying to address this challenge. And the question that was brought forward was, if we were to start again today and to learn from all of these experiences, would we start by calling it PVE, CVE education? or if we really try to understand and look at the issues and needs that young people at risk of or facing all these aspects of fake news online and hate in so many different spaces and polarization and all these dynamics, if we were trying to look at an evidence-based approach and to really understand what would be the best way of addressing this, would we perhaps focus more on well-being education, democracy education, and many other aspects, and inviting us to really rethink not only the particularities of individual interventions, but our entire models, approach, and the thinking which guides us as we try to address these difficult issues. And to carry that conversation forward, we have the privilege of being joined by truly one of the leading voices and individuals at the forefront of working to develop evaluation and learning in this field with the United Nations. Jeden, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to your contribution now to the key panel session.
Thank you very much, Kai, for inviting us for this very timely and important event. And I must say that the topics in this forum resonate very well with the core initiatives of the Resource Mobilization, Monitoring and Evaluation Working Group of the UN Global Counterterrorism Coordination Compact. And as the chair of the working group, it is inspiring to witness that synergy among our initiatives and to explore opportunities for meaningful collaboration. So I will talk from the perspective of coordination, really, among the UN entities and non-UN entities that are part of the Global Counterterrorism Coordination Compact. And the compact has a unique convening role in the UN counterterrorism architecture. It was launched by the Secretary General in December of 2018 and has continued to serve as a primary vehicle for coordinated support to member states in their implementation of the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy. And last year alone, just to give you a perspective of the convening power, the CT Secretariat, the Counterterrorism Compact Secretariat that's placed in UNOCT, which is the UN Office of Counterterrorism, facilitated 32 interagency meetings in 8 thematic working groups, 5 in focus discussions, and enabled information flow on best practices, joint research, and capacity building. The membership of the compact includes a total of 46 UN and non-UN entities. The Secretariat of the Compact coordinates this important work among 990 focal points from 136 member states, 12 regional organizations, and partner entities. And this is just an example that this creates a fertile ground for effective dialogue, for collaboration, and really for impactful support. So let me focus on the work that we do within the working group that I chair, and that is the working group on resource mobilization, monitoring, and evaluation. I chair it together with 2 of my colleagues from UNODC and CTED, and it is one of the 8 working groups, as I said, of the compact. So our mandate is really to facilitate 2 important work streams. So you saw in the name of the working group, you have resource mobilization. So fundraising, going to a funding partner to get support goes hand in hand with having a good capacity for doing meaningful evaluation. So the second work stream that we work on is the support for development of common monitoring and evaluation approaches on counterterrorism and prevention of violent extremism. So I would like to focus on one of the study that we have done in 2021. As part of our work, we've commissioned in the working group the first UN system-wide metasynthesis study, which analyzed the results of 118 evaluation and oversight reports of 18 compact entities. And this was a retrospective exercise. It was what has been achieved, what has been learned and improved during the previous 3 years or so. So the synthesis identified a number of lessons learned and best practices across the compact entities. One of the best practices that was generalized to be relevant for most compact entities was in the area of evidence-based programming. The synthesis highlighted that the best designed programs started with robust research, that they paid attention upfront to the implementation plans, including on continuous data collection for monitoring. Those programs pursued a long-term strategy and they adjusted as needed to stay on track. the synthesis also highlighted the importance of upfront investment of human and financial resources, also the importance of encouragement of project managers to be driven by evidence-based research along the process, and the important role of high-quality data in evidence-based evaluation. So the synthesis noted evidence for success in the implementation of the strategy, but it also identified areas where perceptible improvements could be made. 6 recommendations were put forward as a result of this exercise, which are currently at the various levels of implementation under the working group on resource mobilization, monitoring, and evaluation. And I'll focus on 4 of them. The first, for instance, the synthesis identified large gaps in availability of evidence, which did not allow evaluators to fully assess the degree of success of the implementation of the strategy across the compact entities. So it concluded that there is a need to really conduct a full-fledged independent evaluation of the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy, as well as the need to establish a unified monitoring and evaluation framework that doesn't exist. You know, all of the UN entities and non-UN entities part of the compact, they operate under their own results framework, but there's no such thing yet as a unified one. So this recommendation was echoed in the latest 8th review resolution of the Global Counterterrorism Strategy, specifically in operative paragraph 96, where the General Assembly requested the Secretary General to assess in future progress reports the implementation of the strategy based on a unified results framework. So that gives us the mandate to implement this important instruction by the General Assembly, but it also is aligned with what the meta-synthesis study found. So the working group is currently establishing a clear process for this, for the stakeholder participation and engagement, to ensure that all of the stakeholders, including compact entities and member states, they're fully engaged throughout this upcoming evaluation. And of course, there will be a wide dissemination of evaluation results. That's essential for ensuring that the evaluation results are utilized across all of the compact entities. So we recognize, of course, that this will be a resource-intensive exercise because it will require evaluation of results at national, regional, and global levels across all of the compact entities. And we've been actively engaged in forging partnerships and fundraising initiatives to secure the necessary strategic, technical, and financial support to ensure success of such an independent and full-fledged evaluation. So moving on to another recommendation of the meta-synthesis, the study found and made clear the need for developing evaluation capacity among compact entities. In response to this recommendation, our working group, in partnership with the European Union, developed the Compendium of Good Practices for Measuring Results in CT and PCVE. And I would like to thank you, Kai, for really dedicating a full session for this important publication that we are now in the process of really socializing among relevant, not just compact entities, but relevant stakeholders, to present examples of those good practices and evaluation approaches, processes, tools from the compendium. And so you will hear more today in a later session from the experts who have brought those good examples from different organizations to this very important publication. The third recommendation was in the area of launching a knowledge platform. And so the synthesis found a challenge of not having in the system the knowledge management platform for sharing knowledge and disseminating good practices and lessons learned in CT and PCVE. So the working group, in response, through its subgroup on evaluation, has launched a community of practice on monitoring and evaluation for CT and PCVE. It's meant to be an interactive space for evaluation practitioners to share information, lessons learned, good practices, also a space to explore innovative solutions, support joint evaluations across compact entities. We're really right now at the starting stage of developing this. This is meant to be a platform that unites a lot of the compact entities and beyond, and hopefully with more partnerships and resources, this will really turn into what the metasynthesis was meant to have it to be. And then the fourth recommendation is in the area of research. Currently, the RMIMI working group is addressing the recommendation that is focused on the grounded research. It calls for the compact entities to partner sectors in the UN and beyond, including civil society organizations and the private sector. And the aim is really to harness existing research and study what works, what does not work. The recommendation was driven by the finding that there is limited knowledge on how people are radicalized, how they are driven to violent extremism, and therefore investment in research activities was proposed to be essential. So the working group is currently working on conceptualization of a possible research symposium. So this is just a background and perhaps a brief overview of where we are as a follow-up to this very important study. And over the past 2 years since this metasynthesis study was published, it's been really encouraging to witness the growing implementation of its recommendations that are contributing to the advancement of evidence-based practices. So the message here, perhaps the key takeaway is the reason we're sharing it with you also is we are inviting colleagues who are joining in this very important forum to join efforts, to exchange good practices, to engage in collaborative partnerships with us. If any member states are joining, contribute to the financing of our evidence-based initiatives through the Counterterrorism Coordination Compact. We have a group of evaluation experts in the subgroup on evaluation that is within the context of the working group on resource mobilization, monitoring, and evaluation. Their work is active, and we would be delighted to have and continue those discussions on future areas of joint work. So thank you, Kai.
Thank you, Jane. You covered so much with such a rich and full contribution. Very much appreciated. I wanted to connect just a moment when you were saying a call to member states to finance evaluation to be done. It's interesting that we have seen cumulatively trillions of dollars spent over the last 20 years on trying to counteract terrorism, radicalization, and violent extremism through multiple wars, multiple large-scale initiatives and programs, from domestic policing initiatives, educational initiatives, policies across social, economic, urban planning fields. So much has come within this area of engagement. And what we have very often seen is initiatives and programs which sometimes fail to achieve their goals. Sometimes not only don't contribute to preventing and reducing radicalization and extremism, but may in fact contribute to increasing it. And it's interesting because we hear often, or at least in some contexts from policymakers and governments, that we don't have time to do evaluation. We need to do this policy. We need to do this initiative. And yet when we're speaking of areas of policy and engagement that go for years and decades, understanding if what we're doing is working and how and why, or if we need to change course, or to echo, Fenicia, one of your comments, also focus more on prevention and upstream engagement. The importance of evaluation is key. I want to connect also with your speaking to evaluation synthesis. This is something that I think much more of the field is familiar with today, but still it is one of those newer areas. And you reminded me of Eleanor Chalimsky and the pioneering work that she did years ago, where they were addressing this issue of when policy and government and decision makers need data at their fingertips. We don't necessarily have the time to propose a 3 to 5 year evaluation or study. We need to look at what is the evidence that is out there and then do an evaluation synthesis to draw out key findings and lessons. But then what is key, and you spoke about this idea of a common, united monitoring and evaluation framework. What's key is to make sure that that evidence we're drawing from is verifiable, is rigorous, and that it helps us to get the right type of information needed to help inform policy and practice. So much more that you spoke to, including an invitation to all of us to contribute and engage in this joint effort together. On that note, I'd like to introduce and to welcome one of my heroes in the field, and someone whose writing has been a tremendous inspiration, helping us to truly go deeper in understanding, in particular, PVE, CVE education, but also so much more in the field over years. Lynn, we are privileged to have you with us today. Thank you for joining the key panel event for the Indeed 2023 Policy and Practitioners Forum.
Thank you, Kai. Can you hear me okay and see? Are we all right? Yeah.
We hear and see you well.
Good. Thank you for inviting me. It is an honor and a privilege to share a platform with such distinguished speakers. I come from two strands, if you like, to be able to contribute to this. One is academic years of trying to do research on things like extremism, radicalization, as well as conflict areas, and supervising students who are doing their own evaluations and looking at the trials and tribulations that they face. So I come from an academic background, but also a practitioner background with an organization called Connect Futures, and we're doing training and some research evaluation of programs in exploitation, extremism, knife crime now, and increasingly misinformation, fake news, and these sorts of areas. So lots of training programs which we have to evaluate and want to evaluate, and have to think about all the time about did it work. So I'm welcoming this event very much, and also thinking about where we go from here, in thinking about the work of Rand, for example, which is brilliant. 2018, I did a study with Rand on policies in EU member states on education and anti-extremism. And it was interesting then how difficult it was to actually find who in which country was in charge of that. It was not easy then people to pass the buck, and I was saying, who's doing the education component of counter-terror in your country? And some were easy to find and others were not. And I think anything that tries to bring people together that are actually working in the field is to be welcomed. And certainly the notion of a synthesis is something that I've been very keen on. I've done studies on what works. I did international one, I think 23 countries. And it's very difficult to identify some concrete things. And all you end up with, I think, is some very obvious baselines that for things to work, you need national action plans and strategies. You need some baselines in schools around whole school approaches and trying to combat the normalization of violence, because you can't do one-off interventions into an organization, into an outfit where it's a one-off. So we know enough, I think, about one-off interventions as being great, visiting theatre groups, drama, sports, whatever you're doing. But it's the evaluation which looks at the long term, and that's everyone knows about the difficulties of long-term evaluation on any of these sort of areas. You can do the feedback, which we do, and the kids and the teachers say, "Oh, that was great. I really enjoyed that. Has it made a difference? Are they changed?" And it's so difficult, particularly in the education field, to go back in 5 years because people have left anyway. Are they changed? Have they changed their view? And I think it's also trying to think about unforeseen elements of interventions. I was looking at one in Afghanistan where, yes, they'd increased an intervention to build young people's self-esteem and sense of agency. And ironically, the ones that had greater agency were the ones that were more likely to be critical of government because it was about critical thinking, and therefore to be more violent. So, you've got to always look at those things. In my research hat. I was going to write a book called Great Research Disasters, because of all the things that went wrong. And then that was going to be followed by a second volume called Great Evaluation Disasters. Because I think what we don't spend enough time on is what doesn't work. We can have results that say, 65% of people change their views or whatever. What about the 35% of people who didn't? What happened to them? We've got problems of, I think, too easy acceptance of what sounds lovely. And I've been looking at what the evidence is on some of the initiatives, the moralizing ones that say, all you need to do is love each other and it'll all be fine. We take the kids to the mosque, and then they will therefore have greater understanding of Islam. No, they won't. They'll enjoy their visit to the mosque, but they won't remember, or they won't put that in a context. And we know enough, particularly now, don't we, with Israel, Hamas, that what changes, you can do a wonderful program where people are tolerant of each other. And then you have an international event where you're completely overtaken by what's appearing on the media, on the hate speech, on the internet, on all the media platforms, which shift views completely in the other direction. I don't think we can do much about that. But what we're trying to do, I suppose, at the very minimal level is something about resilience. So I'd like to see more on what doesn't work. What are the things where you've gone in and done something and it hasn't worked, and then to be able to analyze what's going on. I think you need to go back. We need in evaluations to go back to the target groups, so-called target groups. We've done evaluations of a program, and we've not always, and guilty of this, gone back to the kids or the young people or the teachers even, saying, this is what we found. Why do you think this worked or didn't work? It's not just saying to them, how was it for you, which we do, but saying, why didn't this, why do 20% of you didn't like it? Why? What was going on? And I think we could do far more about seeing all of our target groups as participants in research. That's an obvious point to make, and I'm preaching to all sorts of converteds here. But it's saying, what are we doing with our evaluations? What are we doing with our evidence-based work? What are we doing with the knowledge that we have that some things don't work? And what are we doing with the sort of international syntheses or events? I have been to a lot of conferences, I'm sure you have as well, where international conferences where ministers in particular stand up and say what they're doing in their countries around extremism, violence, democracy, and outlining a very good program, and everyone looks very pleased. But we haven't got any evidence from that on what people take away. Do they actually change their practice as a result of going to a conference? Do they actually go away and say, yes, this sounded good, I really will take that up in my country? And I don't think they do, because they've got their own things and they don't want to muddy that by taking on something that is other people are doing. There's no impetus to actually learn from practice. I'm being very cynical here, but I think it's important that we're realistic about what happens with evidence and whether it's really, really evidenced. And I want to see much more on what people take away. We've got RAND's collection of 200 inspiring practices. It's brilliant, but I don't know what to take away from that. They've got the 200 inspiring practices, but on what basis do I then pick among those 200 inspiring practices to say this would be good for our team or our organization or our country? So we need, and I'm just rehearsing, I think, what we're already saying in this panel, we need a lot more that brings that evidence together, tries to find some baselines on what works and baselines on what doesn't work. This direction is probably not something that's going to take you very far, nice though it sounds. So I'm welcoming very much this whole conference. I think it's a brilliant idea, and I think it's inspiring in itself that we can try to think about the ideas of evaluation. I'm going to be welcoming very much the good practices in evaluation more than the good practices in extremism, in educating against extremism, because I think that's going to be good. But I hope that it will also outline things to avoid, things to be careful about, things to worry about when you're doing the evaluations. Because of the work, a lot of work I've done in the international field and in context of fragility, trying to do evaluations in contexts of poverty and fragility is even more difficult because of the fear that people have of what they say in questionnaires, in surveys, interviews. You've always got to get over that idea of what are people bringing to that evaluation? What's in it for them to answer a question? What are they trying to get out of it when they respond to your requests? And I don't think we spend enough time thinking about what people want from participating in our evaluation. So I'm looking forward to hoping that all of these questions will be answered, and there'll be a lot more coming up in the rest of this conference. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for listening to me ranting on.
Lynn, thank you so much. And thank you for raising very important questions. You spoke about being cynical. I think it's actually, in fact, something that's very needed in our field, to be realistic and to speak honestly and realistically together. When you're asking about what are people's interests when we come to them with surveys and interviews, part of what we're hoping through the Indeed process and in our engagement together as a field more broadly is that we begin to really reflect and not take for granted some of the practices that we've had. For example, the vast and overwhelming majority of those engaged in evaluation practice in Europe today very much come from particular identity groups, particular academic and educational backgrounds, particular economic affluence and classes, and are very often from academia or think tanks or specific institutions. We have evolved very little in the evaluation practice, learning from what's being done in international development or other fields, where you have communities and stakeholders more directly involved in also looking at what knowledge do we want to have, what questions are we asking, and engaging directly. In the field in the United States, you've had the robust development over the last 20 years of discussions around cultural competency and knowing the different social identity community groups that we're engaging with. And for example, in our evaluation teams, actually reflecting that. And then when we do evaluation, not just taking information and knowledge from people and bringing that in our reports to donors and governments and publications, but seeing that people in communities should own this knowledge and this information, and that there should be an ethics in evaluation and a professional competency, which includes also communicating back and engaging with communities, engaging with stakeholders to see what do they think about it. You mentioned in terms of turnover in the field, and you know, people are there, they learn, but then they go forward, they move on from there, whether teachers or youth workers or people in government or otherwise. And it's a very important question. How do we actually create a knowledge field? So in medicine, doctors might move into different positions, but there's this robust trying to learn from practice, learn from what works, and through education and training of new generations, through communities of practice, journals, conferences, case learning, to really help to learn together, and also having a do no harm code of conduct as well. So some of the inspiration we might draw from others. But I really want to touch on one point that you mentioned. Sometimes the need to get beyond the feel good and the need to look at the successes. We can report positive results with 65% of a group, but what about the 35% who didn't engage? And if you reach 65% who are already convinced, but you don't reach those who wouldn't be, have you actually had any success? A very significant challenge is also, how do we deal with contentious issues in our world and in our societies today? when we have seen a more than doubling of the number of wars in the world today, and when people can legitimately look at the military interventions in Afghanistan, the military interventions in Iraq, the current escalation of war in Israel-Palestine, and have difficulty with what they're seeing. What is the space for authentic process? What is the space for protest? What is the space for democratically recognizing that sometimes our state policies may be primary factors in fueling extremism, and that the aim isn't to not have people get upset by something that's wrong, but to actually not be doing the something that's wrong or looking for better solutions. This gets us to much of the heart of a lot of what we want to look at. We only have a few minutes remaining in the key panel event before we move into the 5 sessions for today. And if it would be all right, I'd like to take this opportunity, Fenicia, Jed, and Lynn, to ask you, you're each individuals who has decades of experience in this field, working in evaluation, working in policy, working in practice. If you were to just pause for a moment and, drawing from all of your experience, look to where you feel we need to go in the field, in our work. Tarja, in her opening comments, called upon us to be courageous also. And I'd like to ask you, speaking to a community of practitioners, policymakers, researchers, people engaged in practice, people engaged in evaluation, if there are some key things you'd reflect that you think we need to get better at or we need to work on in our field to improve evaluation, practice, and policy in addressing key issues of radicalization, extremism, and the factors that drive them. So I thought a short, simple question to end the session with, but any reflections, any thoughts that either of you would like to share to that?
Perhaps, Kai, I would start because I would speak from the coordination perspective and dealing with many entities on that, identifying that sometimes we tend to work in a vacuum and we tend to conduct an evaluation and not really socialize that knowledge across the community. And I think where we need to be is really to open that space for exchange of information, for dialogue. I am so pleased to see 2 of my fellow speakers here on the line, and I will certainly get in touch with them and make sure that we work together, that we know what the challenges are, so that we can put our heads together and see how we can collectively address it. I think there is not enough of that, perhaps. And then the second challenge, I would say, because you spoke a lot about involving beneficiaries and involving the community. And I think evaluation language is a highly technical language. And at the beginning, especially when we did a lot of promotional work about the metasynthesis results, it came very clear to us that that term is not clear. It was not clear why the exercise was conducted. And it was difficult until we did kind of the rebranding of the messaging, reformulation, putting it in a simple speak, it was not possible to actually convey important messages in a simple language that people can understand to folks who would then need to socialize that knowledge further, implement it, and so forth. So I would say, just being aware that evaluation community is a technical community, and if we want and need to work beyond that, we need to adapt our language.
Thank you, Jaren. Fenicia, Lynn.
Yeah, just going on from that, I think that's crucial, because the point I was making just now was this notion of involving people as the obvious thing, participants in evaluation, not just beneficiaries of an intervention. And right from the start, when you're talking about baselines for something, involving the people right at the beginning, saying much more on what we're trying to do, and if we're trying to build resilience, what do we mean by resilience? What do you understand by that word? And and now here's the intervention, and then we're going to look at it. And we don't do enough of that. I don't think we tell people from the beginning about what we're trying to do, what baselines we're trying to build, what our intervention is trying to do, because we're frightened that this will then somehow skew everything. And I think there's a dilemma there about involving people in a program and then with the evaluation might be biased because they know what's going to be coming. And I think we've got to think through those dilemmas of making sure that participants understand the language that we're using, the language not just of evaluation, but the whole of our outcome with our theory of change and what we're trying to change. We're not honest with people about the theory of change. We're not honest about saying we're trying to make you more, less violent, or we're trying to change your attitudes. We just go in and say, here's a program. I don't know how you get over that, but I'd like to see more on, involvement and genuine involvement of people. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Please, Fenicia.
Thank you, Kay. Yes, in my view, we have perhaps general recommendations because we have more, let's say, an overview of the challenges and more strategic approach on prevention of radicalization. But I will say that one thing that's important is this multi-agency approach and information sharing between actors. This should be more and more encouraged, because it is not always the case in each member state, for example, but it's something that we really want to promote. But it's also important to respect, because from the let's say government point of view, the member states administrative culture, because you should. It's very impossible, as I said before, to have just one generic model. You always need to adapt. It's the same for evaluation to each government, because they have their own specificities, and which are built and designed on the specificity of their citizens as well. So this is important to take into account, I would say. I will also emphasize the need for training. For us, if you want to evaluate, but then with the findings, outcomes, this should build training programs to then ensure that you will be able to have more person in charge of the implementation of tools, able to deliver proper results when using them. So this, for me, it's important. And also, yes, I think perhaps a word on risk assessment tools that also should be adapted to, as I say, each national context, but also to each specific situation. You are not talking about the same situation when it is for prison inmates or young people, or and also you need to take into account, the different backgrounds of vulnerable people. If there is a kind of migrant background, for example, this is very sensitive and different. So you cannot evaluate the program for those people, for example, as the same way for others. So always taking into account, yes, the root causes of radicalization is very, very important for us. And now we have also specific a challenge with mental health as well. This is very difficult now. The line is can be blurred, and it's something that we are working on it at EU level, and this should be also taken account in doing evaluations, I guess. So yes, no, that's it from my side.
Thank you so much, Fenicia. Thank you, Fenicia. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Jedin. You mentioned mental health now, Fenicia. There have been numerous studies across Europe, around the world, from Bolivia to Japan, Uganda to Canada, which have shown that we are in periods where young people today are facing higher levels of depression, stress, anxiety, self-harm, suicide attempts than at any previous period in recorded history, as well as lower levels of confidence in the future and hope for the future. At the same time, what we often do not hear is that we have higher levels of youth participation and engagement in a range of movements than we've ever had before. And this also connects with one of the points you made, Lynn, that quite often it's actually those that are in what are sometimes called radicalized or extremist groups, which have high levels of agency. And they are united because they feel empowered, or they're engaged because they feel empowered to address an issue. And how can we engage with that need for empowerment and the need for people to feel recognized and to be able to address difficult issues that we have in the world today? Many of you spoke of the importance of multi-agency, multi-sectoral approaches and coming together as we're doing in the forum today and tomorrow. I just want to also flag that we do have sessions, as I mentioned, with the European Forum on Urban Security, which is a platform that brings together from across different sectors. And we'll also be sharing experiences from Indeed's own work, where smart hubs have either been engaged with in countries where they already exist or developed, bringing together psychologists, mental health workers, law enforcement agencies, educators, social workers, non-governmental organizations, local authorities, law enforcement agencies, and others, creating a forum in which practitioners on the ground can be learning from each other's experiences, sharing from each other's analysis, insight, and intelligence, understanding of issues and needs, and also looking at how we can improve evaluation in our practice within our fields and together. You also spoke just now about training. And I should mention that there are a lot of initiatives to improve and develop training, from the United Nations itself to the European Union Crime Prevention Network, which has developed a new training in the field on evaluation, and we'll be hearing from them through the forum as well. And indeed, within the Indeed project, we are creating two training packages, training support packages, training manuals, and curricula. One on how to design evidence-based evaluation, design and do and implement evidence-based evaluation. And the second will be on how to design policies, interventions, and strategies using evidence. We have a session tomorrow looking at training and capacity building in the field, and we will also be rolling out training at the national levels in the European Union in several countries through 2024 and beyond. And if anyone is interested in accessing these resources, materials, and more, please do get in touch with us. We'll also share with everyone taking part in the forum that we are collecting all of the key resources and materials that are being mentioned, and we have invited all contributing organizations and speakers to share with us key publications, videos, toolkits, and handbooks, and we're collecting these together, and we'll share them with all participants after the completion of the forum. We'll also, on the Indeed website, create a knowledge series, and there's an area where we will be launching a podcast, interviewing practitioners, experts, evaluators, key individuals in the field. We'll be hosting a series of webinars throughout the rest of the year and beyond, producing learning notes and also video interviews. And the purpose of this is to create a breadth of knowledge tools that can help us improve our sharing and exchange within the field. I would like to thank everyone who's contributed to this session, the speakers, Fenicia, Jedin, and Lynn, also everyone for engaging actively in the chat space. For the next step, we're going to ask you to choose which of the 5 parallel sessions you'd like to take part in. Those sessions are beginning after we will have a short break. So we're going to have a break for the next nearly 20 minutes from 2:40 Central European time until 3 o'clock Central European time, so Brussels time. This is a space where we can refresh, stretch our legs, but also you can engage in the networking and lunch break space on the platform to be able to communicate and interact with other participants. When we come back on the hour, we will have 5 sessions. One on evidence-based evaluation, a key step forward for PCVE policy and practice. The second, we'll be looking at lessons and experiences from cities within the European Forum on Urban Security, a city spotlight showcasing and assessing local PCVE initiatives. The third will be a very interesting session on evaluation of PCVE strategies and policies. The fourth, evaluation of the Mayor of London's Shared Endeavour Fund. And the fifth, a chance to continue with Jedin and her colleagues going deeper into learning about the compendium of good practices in measuring results in counterterrorism and preventing and countering violent extremism. I have to say, I think I jumped a little bit. I was thinking we were going to end on the half hour, but actually we still have 5 more minutes left before we get into the break. I want to just mention again that in the question and answers area, there's a little button on your screen, Q&A, and there are a number of questions there. We have one on, is there any international policy framework particularly addressing exclusivism, because that is the beginning of extremism. We have another on, don't you think that the UN response in general and with regards to counterterrorism in particular is challenged currently due to the polarity or due to shift in the international order when we evaluate it? There are also a number looking at French policy from the recent surge and uprising against the French position in most French-speaking countries led to a coup by the military. Has there been any monitoring and evaluation of French foreign policy in Africa? If so, what were the outcomes? So those are large questions as well. And I just want to open, as we have a few minutes remaining, in case, Jaren, Fenicia, Lynn, if you would like to take the opportunity to respond to any of those questions that have been raised by participants.
Okay, I can already take the one on Africa, because I'm also working on this area in particular. So, but the question is a bit touchy in the sense that even though I'm French actually, and seconded by the French government to the EUCT coordinator, but I would say that I'm not in a position to comment on France's positions in Africa. But clearly, there is no doubt that we need to work more closely with local African authorities, particularly in the Sahel, to better understand their perception of the terrorist threats and their need in responding to it, but also to prevent any forms of radicalization. And this is very important for us. And it was also the main objective of the regional conference the EU jointly organized with the Nigerian official authorities in May 2023 in Niger, in Niamey. And we wanted to promote the civilian approach of CT, precisely to not repeat the mistakes of the past, particularly with what had happened in Mali or Burkina Faso, and our very military approach, which could seem remote from the concern of the population, and in particular in terms of radicalization. So the idea for us was to better take into account of the local dimension of the various countries in the Sahel, as well as the different various communities, to better adapt our response and our support to this country. We wanted to strengthen the ownership of African countries, because they are the best placed to understand the root causes of the radicalization of their populations. And our credo now is to encourage African solution put in place by Africans to solve African problems, if I can resume it. So unfortunately, we had not anticipated the coup in Niger this summer. So we have lost a key partner in the region in the fight against terrorism and prevention of radicalization in the Sahel region. But we really wanted to continue our initiative and to promote the civilian approach with other Sahelian states. So this is a kind of lesson learned as well, particularly in the context of the expansion of the terrorist threats toward West Africa and the coastal states. And in this context, we will travel with a coordinator in 10 days and be visiting Mauritania, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire. And so also what is very interesting that we, in the civilian approach, take into account the fight against disinformation, which clearly undermines the activities of the EU and our member states in this country. And to this end, we are now investing more on strategic communication to ensure that our efforts in the region are better understood by the population. And as I said, taking account of the specificity of each countries and localities. And we have also set up a dedicated task force on strategic communication for Africa within the EU, with the European External Service, EAS. So that's it. Perhaps it's a few elements to try to reply to the questions.
You still have time, Kai? I can't hear you.
I can hear you go.
We do for short responses, yes.
Okay. Well, the question was about how do we maneuver in this context of member states and the situation, the global state of affairs and so forth. And I just need to say that in the 8th review of the Global Counterterrorism Strategy, just from the experience of being in intergovernmental discussions, it's when we discuss evaluation, UN member states normally are very keen to evaluate UN entities as opposed to evaluate themselves. So when we are there, we are normally either at their request or at the permission of member states to be there and evaluate. And so when we get that permission to work with them and to evaluate activities perhaps, or jointly have that evaluation, we then make sure that we have the multiplicity of stakeholders and diversity of stakeholders to make sure that all the different voices are brought to the table when the evaluation is held. And of course, we adhere to the standards and norms of the UN evaluation group. We call them UNEC standards and norms, and that is to ensure that the evaluation is independent. Thank you. I hope that answers. You're still on mute, Kai.
I'm so sorry. I'm turning it off and then it gets turned back on. Lynn, please.
No, these are very big questions. I'd need a lot of time to even think about them, so I'll pass on those questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Lynn. One thing I would share just on some of those is that Sir General Rupert Smith, one of the longest serving and most senior military commanders in the world, one of the most senior British military commanders. He was the longest serving commander of the forces in Northern Ireland and the deputy commander of the First Gulf War. He wrote a book about 10 years ago called The Utility of Force, even more than 10 years ago. And one of the things that he pointed out is that force does not have utility today. So we're having military interventions and presence in some countries in Africa, which were costing up to €1 billion a year. And in reality, what we saw was increased recruitment, continuation of corruption, and often more people being killed by national armed forces and police than by non-state actors. Whereas had there been actual usage of those resources to invest in employment and job creation, meeting basic needs, community-based healthcare, community-based education, those are proven instruments which have been shown to lead to reductions. So we're quite often funding interventionist-based approaches which also worsen authoritarianism and polarization within countries and lead to higher numbers of civilian casualties and destruction, which are then the number one recruiting factors for why people are joining often what we label as terrorist organizations. We saw the same in Northeast Nigeria, where one of the major reasons why people were joining Boko Haram, when you actually interviewed members in Boko Haram, was to protect themselves and their families from attacks from police and military, which were being funded by the European Union, the United States, and others. So it is a very important question, and we have to look domestically and internationally at how our policies and interventions themselves may be instruments of and fueling terrorism and polarization and division. And how can we actually, from micro level interventions at communities to our macro level policies and engagement together globally, address the issues and challenges we're facing in ways that contribute to solutions. Thank you for such rich contributions and discussion. Thank you even more for the deep work that you and your colleagues are involved in, Jaren, Fenicia, and Lynn. We are now in our break session, and we will be beginning again at 1500 Central European Time, 3 p.m. Central European Time, wherever you are joining us from in the world. We know we have some colleagues with us late night from Asia, some already from the Americas, many with us here from across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. We hope you will join us again for the next sessions. You click on schedule, then click to join the session you would like to. But for now, I would like to express our deep appreciation and thanks, Fenicia, Jaren, and Lynn, for your contributions to the 2023 forum with the opening of our key panel event. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.